again. Ian Stokey with Mastermind Games, back with Malifaux and Vincent St. Clair. Tanned Skin 09044. So, Vincent St. Clair was a guild witch hunter. Or was it an exorcist? I think it was exorcist, one of the two. Exorcist. Oh boy, lose my mind. Just read the fiction, reread it to get this right, and I screwed up immediately. Well, anyway, he was called to the home of a former guild sergeant and Raven's mother to exorcise their daughter, who had been becoming a family embarrassment since coming to Malifaux, exhibiting strange predilections and abilities. And what he saw was a barely dressed girl chained to a freezing bed in an attic. And possibly due to Rava's power of being able to subconsciously influence potential protectors, his own disgust at how many innocents he had been ordered to kill at the behest of the guild, or, in my opinion, probably a combination of the two. He had had enough, and he locked Rava's parents in their own attic and took her out into the world, and with a bit of help from the family butler, who had also come under Rava's sway. He escaped with her into the slums and has been her stalwart protector ever since, protecting her from the more direct threats of the slums as well as the guild, and preparing himself for the day when the undead she controls, he feels, will inevitably turn on her. Which, let's face it, is possible, but I would also say unlikely given Rava's powers and particular disposition towards the undead. It's a little thick. And then, let's see, Templar Blue 09056. Do his pants as well. I'm just going to do denim again. So in second edition, St. Clair is a henchman, meaning he can lead small to medium-sized games in lieu of a master. But I don't know how third edition treats that yet, because again, I still don't have any of the things for that outside the Dead Man's Hand pack. It's the only thing I've been able to get so far, just due mostly to lack of availability. So it's a good starting to let that dry before moving on. Alright, next, Shield Brown 09161. And I'm just going to do the entire crossbow now and then pick out details on it later after this dries. But guild exorcists deal with some of the most dangerous threats out there, and do so, well, heavily armed with tools, blessed crossbows, and magics that are suited to their tasks. But as in Vincent St. Clair's case, sometimes they are required to do things that are not exactly ethical. I doubt very many sign up to kill innocent people solely for political reasons, but unfortunately, 09110 oiled leather. Unfortunately, the guild is a very corrupt organization. After winning the Black Power Wars, between the time that the original breach closed and the new breach opened. They, well, got quite drunk on their own authority and power. So the Black Power Wars are a fairly new thing in the fiction, actually, because in earlier books, it mentioned the guild gained power by seizing all soul stones and making monopoly of it between the times the breach was closed, during the time the breach was closed, but not really how, and that was later retconned as to being the Black Powder Wars, named after the type of weapons that dominated it. Because keep in mind, Malifaux is based on an alternate version of Earth where magic actually exists, and thus certain events played similarly but not exactly. And with the reopening of the breach and multiple lesser breaches, the guild's monopoly is definitely not a certain thing anymore, as shown in what little I know about the other side, which is a larger scale miniatures game that, while taking place in the same universe as Malifaux, is incompatible and details what's going on Earth during this new occupation of Malifaux. And is essentially their equivalent of World War I, except instead of a bunch of normal nations pounding on each other, it's normal nations plus monsters and cultists pounding on each other. The guild is in that game as mercenaries that'll work for certain factions, but I have read that they have definitely taken a hit to their power, both political and otherwise. Likely because of the smuggling efforts of groups such as the Arcanists and Ten Thunders, supplying nations alternatives to guild-controlled soulstone. And that gets his coat. Let's make his boots match. A very simple color scheme. So if I had done this in bright yellow, it'd look a bit like Dick Tracy. This is got a little too much water in it. Few people think of politics as a weapon of war, but it really is. After all, it's usually politicians that decide when to fight. And one of the reasons the guild can't just go in and wipe out the Arcanists, for example, is because of politics. Because if they did, the guild's own popularity coupled with the Arcanists' popularity would result in massive riots they would be incapable of containing. Alright, once that's dry, I can do the last two base coats and move on. Next up, Tarnished Steel 09206. Which is about empty, but I think I have enough to do what I need to do. Basically getting the working mechanism of the crossbow, as well as the bolt. I think that will do. Now, Uniform Gray, which is an army painter color. I could do more color on the coat, but I think I'm satisfied with having a more sparse and perhaps monk-like appearance to him. Okay. Let that dry, and then I can start shading. Alright, time to shade. Blackened Steel 09205. Thinning this with 1 part water to 1 part paint. And this is unfortunately the only shade I can do right this minute. So just going to have to wait. Fortunately, it's hot and dry enough today that I won't have to wait too terribly long before I move on. But your humidity and temperature will affect your drying times. The shade takes the longest due to the concentration of water in it, so back in a bit. Next, Ruddy Leather 09109. Yeah, this one first. But I can do 2 colors on this go. Yeah, I've been have to excuse the sniffing, but I've been taking up a lot of dust. I've been trying to clean my condo, which is something I'm way overdue on. That's getting a nice solid coat here. Avoiding the skin and attempting to avoid the denim, but some of it got on there anyway, but that should be covered up by the shade on that when I hit it. Okay. Excuse me. Woodstain Brown 09160. Being careful on this one not to nick the steel I did previously. It kicked up quite a lot of dust trying to clean out my vacuum cleaner, which is not working properly for some reason, so hopefully it's good clean is all it needs. Okay, let that dry, and I can do the last 3 at once, I think. Alright, time to finish up shading. Let's see. What do I do with it? There we go. Tanned Shadow 09043. So a bit of that. Yeah, don't mind that screaming. It's just an episode of my favorite show, Mystery Science Theater 3000, on in the other room. 09055 Breonne Blue for the denim. Specifically, I've got the episode The Horrors of Spider Island going on. Jumping in and watching that in between painting sessions, which only take a couple of minutes, and mostly got her on to watch something while I clean, or attempt to at any rate. And Stormy Gray 09088. Oh, I need a little more on that right thigh. Excuse me. Kicking up a lot of dust. One thing I am definitely terrible at that I really need to work on is basic housekeeping. I take too long to acknowledge when I need to do it. And even when I acknowledge it, hey, I really need to take a day or so and clean up, I end up delaying it even longer before I finally get started. So something I really need to work on. Okay. Now it's the last of the shading, so once that all dries up, I can detail and highlight. Time to highlight and detail. Matte white. This is an army painter color. Just need a little bit to fill in the eyes. And give that a minute to dry. Then matte black, another army painter color. And carefully dotted pupils. Now, switching to a dry brushing technique, tanned highlight 09045. On a ragged feather brush like this, and no water, straight paint only. Rubbing the bulk of the paint out of the brush on a paper towel. And then lightly dusting, going counter to any sharp edges, like for example the backs of his hands. Ashen Blue 09057. Focusing on the most readily visible areas only. Burnt Orange 09111. Let's see, I just need to find one that's... You do want your brush completely dry, so I'm switching freely here. Again, I'm focusing only on the most readily visible portions of the model, so the underside of the coat, while I shaded it, will not be highlighted. That's just going to remain in shadow. Now that I've got paint on, for some reason he's starting to remind me of a Indiana Jones Nazi. Not the historical Nazis, mind you, but the Indiana Jones caricatures. And that is what they were, caricatures of the real thing, designed to be over the top. Okay. Driftwood Brown 09162. And as the Guild is a totalitarian organization that brooks no opposition, comparing them to the Nazi Party would definitely be fair. Because you should keep in mind that before the Holocaust, the Nazi Party had to come to power and did so via, at least from what my understanding, knocking out any opposition as they gained more and more political clout. But then again, True Silver 09207, it's also likely I have seen sources on that are not accurate either, so always question even what you think you know about something, unless you are, of course, a certifiable expert in the matter, which, while I have a broad knowledge of a number of subjects, it is far from perfect. And now, where is it? Misty Gray 09090. And if your brush looks like a feather duster like this, then that is just about perfect. But you will need multiple sizes for different areas. And that's done. Last thing is to switch to a flathead brush and get out a little more matte black. And a rainstorm is starting outside. Neat. I suppose since I've mentioned already, the question is, will Malifaux go as far as World War II, or will they have their own iteration of it? the way things are going, I'd say just getting far enough along historically, because it's approximately 1920 right now in Malifaux, give or take. I'd say even getting to the 1940s where World War II takes place would be a pretty big if, the way things are going. And if it goes that far historically, their version of World War II would likely be much different than the real world one, and definitely involve magic, monsters, and weapons of mass destruction that make atomic bombs look like firecrackers. So that is the Fallen Guild Exorcist Vincent St. Clair. And next up, some of Rava's living minions. Till next time, I am Ian Stookie with Mastermind Games, signing out.